Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing The Godfather. This film came out in 1972. It was directed by Francis Ford Coppola. This film and this director really don't need an introduction, I don't think. Of course, Francis Ford Coppola is known as one of the greats of the film school brat generation, making some of the most influential films of the 1970s. And The Godfather perhaps being the most influential of any that Francis ever made. I argue it's Apocalypse Now. But I think maybe you could say The Godfather more in terms of accessibility. But the evolution of this American staple, this phenomenon in pop culture, shockingly, was kind of something of a happy accident, a pleasant surprise. But a lot of great works in the world do tend to be happy accidents. Coppola only took the film because his previous films were doing so poorly and his studio was in major debt after THX 1138. He wasn't particularly interested in the film. He found the book to be kind of sensationalized and cheap, but he needed the movie really, really bad. Sometimes, you may not like something or you may not be interested in it, but then after time you start to work on it and you start to find a certain a sense of passion and realize maybe there is something here that I can work with. He's taking this idea, of course, of the Italian mob and that genre, which is, of course, a very melodramatic representation of everything. Everything that America stands for, and that is part of why we are drawn to this particular subject, I think. But he's kind of making it darker, making it more complex and really well-rounded and more of an intimate story. It's more of a character piece than a lot of the gangster films that preceded it, especially the most notable ones that came out in the 1930s. In the 1970s, neo-noir was really taking shape, and that was kind of the resurgence of film noir from the 1940s. And using that vehicle to be the frame for this particular subject, I think is ingenious. That particular genre allows you to explore more of the seediness, the underground ideas, and a lot more of the complexity of the characters, especially having an anti-hero at the center. Exploring the themes of what it means to weigh your morals in your environment that has been passed down from generation to generation in a more authentic and fully dimensional way. This is to me why The Godfather remains one of the most popular of its genre and, a cultural milestone. And yes, when you watch the first film today, I think it holds up absolutely brilliantly. It really does not, for the most part, feel dated, and it's just kind of nearly flawlessly crafted from beginning to end. It is that film about family, but of course heightened with like that Shakespearean tragedy aspect, all the things that you want, and it's perfect for family, so I thought, today would be the perfect time to review it. The evolution of the gangster film genre, particularly in America, particularly in Hollywood movies, has always been very interesting to me, especially in the 1930s. That's where it really starts to take shape as a huge genre that people are really interested in, and it was hugely profitable. And partially that's because in the 1930s, gangsters were rampant all over areas like New York and Chicago. It was far more glamorized than it is now because those were the guys who were kind of running the show of the underground at the time. It was a time when the mob, just outlaws, were glorified and celebrated to a much larger extent than it would later become. Law enforcement feared them. Law enforcement worked with them. And I'm not saying they don't do it now, but it was much different at that time, a lot more exaggerated. And in the early 1930s, those are the best because you get those pre-code gangster movies where they're really there's a violence to it and they're really reflecting a lot of the corruption in America and the moral confliction, but more on a grand scale. Rags to riches and then fall from grace, all the things that we really love, all of our favorite American ideas of greed and capitalism, etc. It was people like James Cagney who had such an unusual acting style and a humor about him that was exciting and different. And you have Eddie G. Robinson, who's just a great actor, very charismatic, and even Humphrey Bogart, he wasn't, he worked for Warner Brothers. He wasn't necessarily a leading man at that point, but he was taking the steps to become that. And it was just that. It was these particular types of personalities on screen that we were drawn to. It was more the relentlessness. It was more the violence. But their emotional center was often remaining intact, still making them interesting and relatable. But I think that while The Godfather has a lot of those same characteristics, ultimately, it's just a lot more fleshed out. There is a sense of realism amidst what is so cinematic in the film, what is kind of that noir-esque style. It feels like looking at this huge family portrait of like a big family gathering with lots of people. And all the stories of the people, it's all just there. It's within all the faces that you see. It's in the clothes. It's in the way that they interact with one another. It all tells a story. It's just one big mosaic, and we just happen to be privy to it. And we see it all unfold organically. And to me, that is what is so wonderful. It is because it's so true to that portrait of American life. The opening scene for me is very, very strong and very, very memorable. Just opening on that man's face as he is pleading to Vito Corleone. The camera stays on his face and is slowly, slowly panning out. And, you know, there's a lot of darkness, of course, that conceals everything, and those kind of haunting portraits of the faces that are heavily in shadow. It makes them feel almost like they're ghosts of the past. It's so simple and so engaging and so full of tension. It gives you everything that you need to know without really saying much. You know who Vito Corleone is from the moment that he begins speaking. You know the authority that this man has, and you don't need much context at all for it. And we know who is gaining from the scene and who is not gaining from the scene. We know who is in control and who is going to see the ultimate payoff. And that clarity, that level of focus is very rare in modern filmmaking, surprisingly. Just script writing in general. And like I say, it is a big portrait of all kinds of different characters. You're not necessarily paying attention to one in particular over everybody else yet. But of course, certain ones are beginning to emerge, taking shape as the major anti-heroes that are going to be kind of the crux for the dramatic story. Michael, of course, being the main one. And I love the way he's handled. I just love Michael purely as a character. I love his character arc. I love the way that Al Pacino plays the role. And I love that this is the particular character who's going to see the fully realized arc. There's no better character, I think, in the story that you could choose to kind of to go on that journey with. The fact that he is an outsider and someone who at the beginning of the film is the last person you would ever expect to become a leader, to get involved to such an extent in the family business. I love that he's not really emphasized much at first at all. I mean, if you watch the movie and have no idea about it, you don't have any sense of Michael becoming anything other than just, you know, who he is with his girlfriend. We get a backstory, but it doesn't seem at all crucial yet. And of course, as time goes on, he's going to rise to that occasion. And he happens to fall into something that perhaps he was always meant for. So in a way, Coppola is living vicariously through Michael. He fell into this project he didn't particularly want, and now it's become everything. It's become the way that people remember Francis Ford Coppola. But having a character who never wanted something and then he becomes exactly what he said he didn't want in the beginning is truly tragic, and it's an idea that truly resonates because so much of human success comes from us being a product of our environment. Whether you want to admit it or not, you know, we often, as people, oh, we want to stand out. I want to be the first person in my family to go to college. I want to, you know, this. And sometimes people do succeed, but I think more often than not, people don't change as much as they think that they do. Like Tony Soprano of The Sopranos, somebody that was born into a life that is expected of him to take on the family business. And you may look at him as this evil man making these horrible decisions, but you know that if you lived in his life, if you were born as Tony Soprano, you would make the same decisions. In his position, you would fall into that business because of the pressures, because of the environment around you. It is the responsibility that falls onto his shoulders. For acceptance, to please your family and friends, whatever it is, it's often too difficult to pass up. And of course, the romanticism of money, success, taking the easy way out. Again, we are more products of our upbringing than we ever care to believe. We so badly want to differentiate ourselves and so badly want to have an identity that is our own, and yet often we don't. And to me, that is the great dilemma and the crux of The Godfather that makes it so intriguing for me. Al Pacino is brilliant in this film. This is maybe my second favorite performance that he's ever given. I would have to say Sunny and Dog Day Afternoon is my number one, but this is a very close second. What he does so brilliantly is convey the subtlety of the character shift so convincingly. He has such an intense stare and those blank, chilling eyes, that expression, that cold stare from the very beginning of the movie. It never wavers. And yet somehow, even with very rarely changing expression, we can somehow feel the wheels turning within him. We feel that shift happening. We can feel the emotions within him as they're happening. We feel his sense of anger, his need for revenge when he's called upon for it. And even though we may never see this in a physical sense so much, or outwardly it's there, and that's such a hard thing to achieve as an actor. Saying so much, but yet expressing so little, you know, just in terms of emoting. Those are my favorite kinds of actors. And I know that when we think of Al Pacino, we don't necessarily think of subtlety or invisible acting technique, not even in the slightest. And that's, I think, slightly unfortunate, but I'm so glad that we see it here and more in his early work. The scene where he carries out the two murders in the restaurant, where it's like, you know, that clear shift in his character. You know, I love how he's just slowly taking you on this journey of emotions, beat for beat for beat. So much is going on within this scene, and it is masterfully choreographed, masterfully shot, just tonally done so well. So cynical, so dark, and yet so invigorating. It feels like this character is being born. Overall, watching this film for the first time in many, many years, I found myself feeling just a sense, a depth to the emotion of it, a really strong core that to me the other Godfathers don't have. And yes, I include part 2 when I say that. This one is just much more satisfying to me as a viewer. The script is much more focused and everything pays off very clearly and concisely. There is an intimacy here and a connection with the characters that I don't feel in the second film. It feels a little bit more uneven. It's so balanced, and the fact that we are seeing this emotional payoff for Michael so clearly as he heads towards such a destructive path is really an amazing thing to witness. And I have to say, just kind of thinking back to it, there are so many gangster films that I love, and to really be able to talk about this, I'd have to go through a lot of them and really think about what I feel about them. But overall, I have to say, I think that The Godfather is, for me at least, maybe the quintessential mainstream Hollywood mob movie that captures all the things that I like to see in mob films, just personally. I respect all the different incarnations. You know, like I said, I love those early Cagney pictures, like Angels with Dirty Faces and Public Enemy, but there's something about this one that just hits a sweet spot. I admire Scorsese's very witty, kind of flashy, more technically flourishy, satirical mob films for sure, but I always felt somewhat removed from them at the same time. And that's just a personal thing. You know, I've said that before, and I know a lot of people disagree with me, but, you know, I just can't help it. There are certain things that I emotionally respond to. And with Scorsese films, I mean, not Scorsese films in general, but just his mob films in particular, I find myself really appreciating them, but not really feeling them so much internally. I am more compelled by The Godfather, perhaps because of the way that it explores those characters, but as also just, I'm more drawn to The Godfather, I think, just because of its connection to the old world and the new generation, and kind of that bloodline continuing being such an important part of it. The gray areas of those traditional values that they're constantly grappling with. However, I know it's not a film, and you know, anyone who knows me well knows that The Sopranos is my quintessential mob story and the quintessential pop culture mob story. Just taking the idea of the American dream that was represented in The Godfather and totally updating it for the turn of the century, the end of the 20th century into the 21st. 1990s suburban America, full of just bored and out of shape people, you know, clinging to the masculinity of the time that like The Godfather took place or Public Enemy might have taken place, and just like feeling this aimlessness as if you haven't worked for anything in your life, probably because you haven't. You know, not to the extent of people like Vito Corleone. That dissatisfaction with that boredom and that current American life, to me, is just so perfectly captured in The Sopranos, and it honors films like The Godfather, and it certainly honors films like Goodfellas even more so, I would say, but it's still completely its own brilliant thing. It has a similar emotional core and a complex core like The Godfather does, but it takes it even further, and I think it takes it further because it has the time to. We must remember it is a television show that played out over 6 seasons, and Godfather is 3 films. Maybe if they had made it into a show, it could have been something like this, but just the idea of The Sopranos being that long, it really gives it a chance to really explore the depth of those ideas and the cinematic influence of films like The Godfather and questioning even just consciousness. There's surreal aspects to it that are very interesting and more self-aware than anything you see in any of the other mob films, quite frankly. And all of these to me are so perceptive, more than anything else that you see in the Italian mob genre in Hollywood. But I've got to say, I went into this kind of seeing Godfather thinking, oh, you know, I'm gonna kind of be comparing it to The Sopranos the whole time, and I really wasn't. It really, really is wonderful for what it is. It took a huge step into the direction that The Sopranos would eventually take that torch and carry it on and make it, in my opinion, even better. And I really can't criticize it much, at least from a, you know, in terms of the script itself. It's just, it's very solid. It's very strong. It is what it is. It's well done. It's perfect to study, especially if you are interested in writing scripts, if you're interested in writing a cohesive story. This is a good example of how it's done. So yes, of course, I know everyone's seen the film, but it's a good film to return to. And that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. All of my Patreon supporters are here. Thank you guys so much. Hope you're having a wonderful holiday. Speaking of the holidays, if you are a Patreon supporter, I do have holiday specials on commissioned portraits that I sell on my website at deepfocuslens.com. If you want more information on discounts, you'll have to go to Patreon and join. But yes, for everybody else, I do sell commissioned portraits and I am an artist. I also sell prints on my website, so you're certainly welcome to peruse. And if you're interested, just let me know. All of my social media information is below that. You can watch more videos here and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.